This week, we're going to talk about why we need FDA pre-submissions. The number one resistance I hear from everybody about why we need, we don't want to do a pre-sub. We want to skip the pre-sub. It's always about time. I don't want to wait 75 days to get the answer. So we will address that question first. Like, why? What advantage is there in skipping the pre-submission and going right to a submission? And in fact, you're not actually doing that. What you're doing is you're doing pre-sub, testing, then your submission. If you skip the pre-sub, you go right into your testing. If you start with testing and you don't have agreement from the FDA in a pre-sub, your risk is that you spend tens of thousands of dollars on testing that the FDA might not accept, and now you have to repeat it. So that's the big risk, is that I have to repeat the testing because I did the wrong test. Either the wrong test, the wrong test conditions, the wrong acceptance criteria. Maybe you didn't do enough samples, so you did one lot and you really need to do 3 lots. Maybe you did 30 samples. The FDA says, no, that's an attribute test. We want you to do 60 samples for attributes, 30 for variables. Oh, your product, we want you to test both time 0 and the endpoint of your accelerated aging. Oh, for your product, we don't think that's the worst case. We don't think the smallest size is the worst case. We think the largest size is the worst case. So there are lots of possible answers. Did a product pre-sub with a device that's used by ophthalmologists. And the FDA said, yes, it's skin contacting. It's going to contact the area of skin around the eye, but there's the possibility that something might drip into the eye. So we want you to look at ocular irritation as well as an endpoint. So instead of 1 irritation endpoint, we want 2 irritation endpoints. And somebody might say, well, if they tell me that, then I have to do that testing. And if I delay 75 days, now versus I delay 75 days later, what does it matter? Well, you have to actually get the specimens to the lab, have the specimens extracted under very specific conditions, and they need to be sterile. So if you have an inventory of samples that are sterile, that are ready to go, it doesn't cost you much. But if you don't have samples that are sterile in inventory, now you have to make the samples, sterilize the samples, send them off to the lab, and have them extracted. Another thing is when they do these extractions, a lot of times they'll do extractions for multiple tests all at once. So the specimens that they use for the extraction are going to be spread out over multiple tests. So if your test specimens are expensive, or you don't have very many of them because you're just developing the product, it's very possible that those biocompatibility samples that you have are rare, and they're very pricey at this stage because they're being made in very small quantities. So you might want to know before you build those prototypes that are going to be tested for biocompatibility, how many do you need and what tests do you need, so you don't have to repeat that twice. So sometimes the delays are caused by we need to make more samples and sterilize them. Sometimes they're caused because we have to repeat the extraction. Sometimes it's you have to do aging. So if we have anything that requires aging for a performance test or a shelf life test or reprocessing, that would be another example, reprocessing. So if you have to do reprocessing of samples, you have to go through all the cycles. So let's say it can be reused 10 times or 20 times. You have to soil the sample artificially, then clean the sample using the same method you normally would, and then disinfect the samples and maybe sterilize the sample if it's used sterilely. And so now you've got soil, clean, disinfect, sterilize, and you have to repeat that 10 or 20 times. That's going to take you time and money. That's why those reprocessing tests might cost 30 grand. So if your company knows exactly what tests need to be done because they've done this before, and they know exactly what the acceptance criteria is, and they already have their worst case scenario, no need for a pre-sub. If you've already done all your testing and you don't plan to do any more testing, there's no advantage to a pre-sub. Even if you're wrong and you did the wrong testing, because you did testing for European standards and the FDA wants something slightly different, you've already done your testing. You can't undo it. So if the testing's already done, or you knew exactly what test needed to be done, you can skip the pre-sub, go into the submission, but everybody on your team, especially your boss, the CEO, needs to understand if we're wrong, if we have the test reports for Europe and we need slightly different test conditions, and the FDA makes us repeat this, now we have 180 days in the middle of the 510K review at the additional information request. That's when the clock starts. We get that letter at 60 days and it says you have 180 days to do all this testing. And if your tests are biocompatibility testing, shelf life testing, some sort of performance test that requires aging or reprocessing, those things take a long time. So all the animal studies, those tend to be somewhere around 10, 12 weeks or longer. Implantation is definitely longer. If you have shelf life testing, the longer time points take more time. If you have any reprocessing, it's all the cycles you have to go through. So that can take you quite a bit of time. And so 180 days may sound like a lot, but to get all the testing you need done might be very difficult in that 180-day slot. So you might have to resubmit and start the whole 510K process over again. So if you think about the things that you want to ask in a pre-sub that are absolutely critical, number one thing you want to look at is anything where I might have to repeat the testing and pay for it twice, because that's just a waste of money. Number two, anything that might take more than 180 days. That's the second set. And the third thing is anything where I might have to make samples and I have to do it in batches rather than one-offs. So if I'm doing a molding run and I'm going to tell the molding house to make me, let's say 100 samples, but it turns out I need 125. You told them to make them 100 samples. They made you the 100 samples. You got to get back to the end of the line, get in the queue for production. Your turn comes up. They make the 100 and whatever the extra samples are you need, and then you build that into product and sterilize it and then do the testing. That's a lot of time wasted. Sometimes the lead time on molded parts can be 4, 6, 8 weeks, even if the mold's already built. If the mold has to be changed anyway, absolute nightmare. So long lead time items where it's going to be done in a batch, that would be another category that would be a reason why you want to make sure you nail down exactly what samples are needed in your pre-submission with the FDA. So I'll repeat it. Number one, anything where you might have to spend the money now and then you don't want to have the money spent on the wrong tests or the wrong conditions and have to repeat it because that's a waste of money. Number two, anything where you have a long lead time and you might not be able to finish it in that 180 days. Anything where you have batches of product with long lead time where it might take you a while to produce the samples. Those are all things that you want to be careful about, that you don't just go ahead and start your testing without the pre-submissions. So those are all really good reasons. We generally, because more and more the FDA is pushing back and requiring companies follow the letter of their guidance documents, we're seeing sort of a shift left in a timeline to asking for pre-subs earlier in the development process. So people say to us, like, is it too early to do the pre-sub? No. We may not have all the protocols that we need to ask all the questions we want, but we can only ask questions on 4 topics in a pre-sub, and we can only ask up to 10 questions. So if you're going to ask questions about biocompatibility and shelf life and reprocessing and clinical studies and human factors and cybersecurity, I'm already up to 7. We can very quickly get past that 4 topics and past the 10 questions in no time. So shifting upstream and doing a little bit earlier pre-sub gives you the flexibility of saying, okay, I'm going to ask the questions about regulatory pathway, the software risk classification. Is it a basic documentation or enhanced documentation? I'm going to ask questions about predicate selection. I'm going to ask about maybe shelf life testing. What is worst case specimens for my protocols? And then I'll follow up with a second pre-sub later for some of the other tests that occur later, like human factors and clinical. Those are validation tests that occur at the end. The verification tests that occur earlier in the development cycle, I want to ask about those first. Biocompatibility should be one of the first questions you're asking about, because normally you don't want to do any verification on something that's going to fail biocompatibility. That's a key point. So make sure you do biocompatibility questions early before you've done your verification, because you don't want to do any verification on something that will fail biocompatibility. And I can't tell you how many clients have had the biocompatibility be the last test they do, and then they call me up, whoops, we're going to have a delay because we failed cytotoxicity. Do your cytotoxicity. It's $1,000 test and takes 2 weeks to finish. Do it before you do everything else. We're not sure whether we want to use this material or that material. Do biocompatibility on both. And now you have a choice. You have 2 that passed or 1 that failed, and you just save yourself a whole lot of heartache. So make sure biocompatibility questions, regulatory pathway questions, any of those early questions get out of the way in the first pre-sub, and you have time and flexibility for a second pre-sub. Everybody says, but then I got to pay for that twice. Our firm, the way we do things, we prepare the first pre-sub. We prepare the device description. We encourage the client to prepare a user manual. Those are things they'd have to do anyway for the submission. So it's not, we just shifted when we're doing it. We're doing it earlier. And then what we do is we prepare the pre-sub. We submit it to the FDA. Now, the second pre-sub, we already have a device description, we already have a user manual, and we already have a pre-sub. Now we're just changing the number from whatever number it was, Q24XXX, whatever it is. Now it becomes supplement 01. And instead of having to fill in that whole thing, we're just changing the number of the submission, and all the company contact information stays the same. All the device characteristics stay exactly the same. What changes is what questions we're going to ask. So we change the document number, we update the cover letter, and so we reference the old one and have a new signature and a new date, and then we ask a new set of questions and have new attachments. But the amount of time to prepare your second pre-sub is very, very short. So we usually do the second pre-subs and maybe even a third pre-sub if you need one by doing hourly consulting, just for the additional time that's required. And it's usually not a lot of time. And the return on investment is huge. And it's not really it's probably not the right way to think of it as an investment. It's probably the way to think of it as an insurance policy. We're spending maybe $1,500, maybe $2,000 on a pre-sub, so we can avoid spending or wasting $15,000 on testing we didn't need, or the wrong test that we have to repeat. Or it's an insurance policy to make sure I don't have delays later on because I have to remake samples and I didn't make enough samples the first try. So those are the reasons why we're doing this. It's to reduce delays, reduce wasting of money, reduce any potential chance of us not having enough specimens to get the testing done on time. So time and money. That's what we're trying to prevent loss of or reduce waste of. So that's why you really do a pre-sub. And can't tell you how many times we've said, we really need to do a pre-sub. The client says, nope, we're skipping that. We're going right into the 510K. We get halfway through the 510K preparation. They say, could you please answer this question about the testing we're doing? Like, we'd love to, but that would be a really good question to ask the FDA in a pre-sub, which you skipped. And so we get a lot of those. And like, this is our best guess. This is what we've seen. This is our best guess, but we can't guarantee it's the right answer. And it's so much better to have something in writing with an agreement from the FDA. Yes, that's the right test, the right acceptance criteria, the right sample size. Everything is right before you spend your money. So that's why you do a pre-sub. They don't take that long. it's hours of work, not days of work. But what causes time is we're waiting for the client to give us a device description, give us a user manual, give us a test protocol. So those are the three things you put in there: is device description, user manual, testing protocol. And that's what you need for each of your questions in a pre-sub. If you're interested in learning more about pre-subs, visit our website, medicaldeviceacademy.com. Link is in my little banner below. On our webinars page, we talk about webinars that we're going to do next Thursday. We're doing a webinar on pre-subs. So we actually did a whole pre-sub tutorial, 4-part series, 4 different weeks, where we actually walked you through how to fill in the pre-start. And this is when it was in version 0.1. It was a beta version. Then they had 0.2, then they had 0.3, then they came out with 1.0. They finally released it as a finished eStar template or pre-star. Now it's at 1.1. We've updated all our training for 1.1. We're updating our examples. Yes, we have actual examples of, here's one for a pregnancy test. We have another one for a wound dressing, like a FRO a dressing with antimicrobial silver in it. And then the third one is a thermometer. So we had 3 different types of submissions, all pre-subs. We're updating one to the 1.1 version. The only other thing that's in a pre-star is the 513G. We have a whole separate webinar for that. So what we're doing is updating the 4-part tutorial on how to use a pre-sub or pre-star for the pre-submissions. We're going to walk you through 3 different examples, walk you through section by section in 4 different parts. So 4 different weeks, hour and 15 minutes for each session. And we're going to actually record it. So if you can't attend it live, you can at least download it. It's only $2.99 for that webinar series. So if you need help on a pre-sub and you don't want to pay somebody else to do it, watch our tutorial. We'll show you step by step. We give you the example templates so you can edit those to make it your product. Instead, we give you all the tips and tricks so you avoid making mistakes that are going to cause delays in your pre-sub, and so you get the most value out of your pre-submission. And this even includes how to do meeting minutes, how to do a cover letter, how to do predicate select. All that stuff is in there. So attend or sign up for our pre-start tutorial, 4 parts, starting next Thursday, 4 weeks in a row. And we look forward to seeing you there. Bye-bye.